When Gwen Stefani arrived on the set of The View, the atmosphere seemed routine, filled with the usual chatter and excitement among the audience. She had prepared for a light-hearted interview about her latest projects, expecting a friendly conversation. However, a tension she didn't anticipate began brewing the moment Joy Behar started steering the conversation toward topics Gwen had avoided for months. Gwen sensed the shift instantly, and her expression tightened as the questions became unexpectedly pointed. Joy leaned forward in her signature bold style, asking Gwen about recent rumors that had circulated online regarding her personal life. The crowd reacted with a mix of gasps and murmurs, sensing the directness of the question. Gwen paused, offering a polite smile, trying to keep her composure. She attempted to redirect the conversation, but Joy pressed on, determined to get reaction. The air in the studio grew more charged as each second passed. Gwen clasped her hands together on her lap, maintaining a calm demeanor even as the tension around her intensified. She tried to answer gracefully, choosing her words cautiously so she wouldn't escalate the situation. Yet every attempt she made to stay neutral seemed to fuel Joy's determination to dig deeper. Viewers could practically feel Gwen's discomfort, her shoulders tensing more with every question. The other hosts exchanged wary glances, clearly aware that the conversation was veering into dangerous territory. One of them gently attempted to shift the energy by changing the subject, but Joy remained locked onto Gwen, unwilling to release her line of questioning. Gwen inhaled sharply, preparing to deflect once again, but irritation began flickering beneath her composure. Gwen began explaining that certain rumors didn't deserve attention, but Joy interrupted her mid-sentence, challenging her response. The interruption caught Gwen off guard, and the audience reacted with an audible "ooh," sensing a confrontation brewing. Gwen's smile faded slightly as she adjusted her posture, preparing herself for whatever Joy would say next. Joy accused Gwen of avoiding accountability, using a firm tone that sent shockwaves across the set. Gwen's eyes widened for a brief second, followed by a deep breath that betrayed her rising frustration. She attempted to clarify her position, trying to maintain her dignity on live television, but Joy's persistent remarks overlapped her words, turning the discussion into a verbal tug-of-war. The producers behind the cameras scrambled, gesturing wildly at the hosts to tone things down. Gwen glanced in their direction, realizing the tension wasn't just felt by her and Joy but by everyone involved. Even the studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether they were witnessing genuine conflict or a moment exaggerated for television. Gwen's voice dropped slightly as she tried one last time to keep the conversation civil. She explained how exhausting it was to have her personal life dissected repeatedly, hoping Joy would understand. Instead, Joy countered with the blunt remark questioning Gwen's transparency. This was the moment Gwen's patience began unraveling, the pressure reaching its peak. Gwen's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing slightly as she registered Joy's tone. She sat up straighter, no longer hiding her frustration. The tension became palpable, as if the entire room held its breath. For the first time, Gwen fired back, saying there were boundaries that needed respect. Her voice remained calm, but the edge in her tone signaled a shift. Joy raised her eyebrows as though daring Gwen to continue. The energy between the two women crackled like static, each word laced with heat. Gwen, unwilling to remain passive, expressed how the constant probing felt invasive, especially when she came on the show in good faith. Joy responded with a sarcastic smile, intensifying the moment further. A hush fell over the studio as Gwen shook her head, visibly taken aback by Joy's dismissive reaction. She attempted to explain how public scrutiny had affected her family, but Joy once again questioned her sincerity, suggesting Gwen had contributed to the noise. This accusation struck Gwen harder than any previous comment, her breathing sharpening. The other hosts tried stepping in again, attempting to cool the conversation, but by now it was clear the confrontation had crossed the line. Gwen's composure cracked just slightly, enough for the audience to catch a glimpse of the hurt behind her irritation. She folded her arms loosely, a defensive gesture she rarely showed publicly. Joy continued pressing, doubling down on her critique. Gwen's jaw tightened as she absorbed each word, her patience thinning to its final thread. She warned Joy that she didn't appreciate the aggressive approach, her voice steady but trembling slightly. The tension was so thick that even the cameras seemed to hesitate, as if unsure where to focus. Gwen leaned back, deciding she wouldn't let Joy continue cornering her. She pointed out that the show was supposed to foster healthier conversation, not public ambushes. Joy exchanged a knowing glance with the audience, fueling the confrontation further. Gwen felt her resolve slipping, her frustration finally outweighing her restraint. The moment Joy challenged Gwen to just be honest, everything shifted. Gwen froze for a brief second, then let out a slow exhale that signaled she had reached her limit. The audience sensed it too, their murmurs rising softly as the atmosphere grew charged with anticipation. Gwen looked directly at Joy, her expression now openly upset. Gwen stood up slowly, her chair scraping lightly against the floor, echoing through the studio. Her posture was firm, her gaze unwavering. She told Joy she refused to stay on a show where she was disrespected. The room erupted in shock, while Joy looked momentarily stunned, clearly not expecting Gwen to take such a bold stand. The producers frantically signaled the hosts, urging them to de-escalate the situation. But Gwen had already made up her mind. She thanked the other hosts for having her voice steady but filled with emotion. The audience watched in stunned silence as Gwen prepared to leave the set, her frustration now fully visible. Joy attempted to call after Gwen, trying to justify the line of questioning as part of the show's format, but Gwen didn't turn back. She simply responded that respect should never be optional, and that no interview justified crossing personal boundaries. Her words echoed across the studio, silencing Joy mid-sentence. Gwen walked toward the edge of the stage, her footsteps slow but deliberate. The camera followed her briefly until producers cut the feed. Audience members gasped, unsure whether they had just witnessed a television meltdown or a long overdue stand for dignity. The energy in the room shifted dramatically, leaving everyone on edge. Backstage, Gwen exhaled deeply as the door closed behind her, releasing the tension she had held in throughout the interview. She ran her hands through her hair, frustrated but relieved to be away from the confrontation. Crew members hesitated to approach her, unsure whether she wanted comfort or solitude. Meanwhile, on set, the hosts awkwardly attempted to transition back to the show's scheduled topics. Joy forced a smile, trying to regain control, but her expression betrayed the impact of the unexpected clash. The studio audience whispered audibly, unable to focus on anything but the dramatic exit they had just witnessed. Joy cleared her throat and attempted to explain her questioning, but her tone lacked the confidence she usually displayed. She framed it as journalistic responsibility, though some audience members seemed unconvinced. The tension lingered heavily, making every word feel strained and delicate. The remaining hosts subtly redirected the show, understanding that prolonging the discussion about Gwen would only intensify the controversy. Yet it was impossible to ignore the uneasy silence that followed. Even the cameras seemed hesitant to pan to Joy, who appeared unusually unsettled. Backstage, Gwen spoke quietly with a crew member, expressing her disappointment. She explained how she had hoped for an uplifting conversation, only to feel blindsided by questions that felt intentionally provocative. Her voice held a mix of sadness and frustration, revealing how deeply the altercation had affected her. Producers eventually approached Gwen, attempting to offer apologies and explanations. Gwen listened politely but remained firm in her view that the interview was mishandled. She expressed gratitude for the opportunity but made it clear she expected better from a platform that claimed to empower guests. Meanwhile, social media began buzzing almost immediately as audience members posted vague reactions about a massive blow-up on The View. Clips circulated online within minutes, despite producers' efforts to control the narrative. The online world erupted with speculation, quickly turning the incident into a trending topic. Joy remained in her chair during the commercial break, quietly reflecting on the confrontation. She seemed torn between defending her approach and acknowledging she had pushed too far. The other hosts offered her gentle advice, reminding her that not every guest responds well to bold questioning. As Gwen prepared to leave the studio entirely, she received messages from her team expressing support. They assured her she had handled the situation with grace, despite the intensity of the moment. Gwen sighed, knowing the headlines would sensationalize the exchange. but feeling confident she had stood up for herself. Security escorted Gwen through a side hallway to avoid the waiting press outside. She offered them a soft smile, grateful for the privacy. Even in her frustration, she maintained her professionalism, choosing not to lash out publicly. Her silence spoke volumes, leaving the world to speculate about what truly happened. As Gwen stepped into her vehicle, she glanced back at the studio with mixed emotions. The confrontation had shaken her, but it had also reinforced her boundaries. She knew the story would explode across media platforms within hours, but she also knew she had honored her truth. With a deep breath, she closed the door, ready to move forward from the fiery moment that had shaken the view. Inside the car, Gwen leaned back against the seat, finally allowing herself a moment to breathe. The adrenaline still pulsed through her hands slightly trembling as she processed the confrontation. Her driver quietly asked if she was all right, and Gwen nodded, though her thoughts remained tangled. She stared out the window, replaying Joy's tone, the interruptions, and the pressure of being cornered. For Gwen, the moment felt far more personal than anything she expected to face on daytime television. As the car pulled away from the studio, Gwen's phone buzzed repeatedly with calls and messages. Friends, fellow artists, and even family members were already reaching out after catching early clips online. Gwen hesitated before responding, overwhelmed by the sudden flood of attention. She knew the world would form opinions instantly, and she braced herself for both support and criticism. The weight of public perception felt heavier than ever. Back in the studio, producers huddled in a tight circle, discussing how to handle the fallout. They debated whether to release an official statement or to let the episode speak for itself. Some feared acknowledging the confrontation would amplify the drama, while others warned that silence could be interpreted as dismissive. The energy in the room was frantic, fueled by uncertainty. Joy retreated to her dressing room, closing the door behind her with a heavy sigh. She sat in front of her mirror, removing her microphone with shaky hands. For the first time in a long time, she questioned whether she had gone too far. She replayed Gwen's reactions in her mind, realizing that the emotional cues had been there long before Gwen stood up. Joy frowned at her reflection, contemplating the fine line between boldness and insensitivity. Meanwhile, Gwen's publicist rushed into action, drafting possible statements and coordinating with her team. They anticipated that the incident would dominate entertainment headlines for days. Though Gwen wasn't eager to speak about the confrontation, her team encouraged her to shape the narrative before speculation spiraled out of control. She listened quietly, still mentally exhausted from the tension. Social media platforms exploded within minutes. Memes, reaction videos, and heated debates flooded the timelines. Some users defended Gwen, praising her for standing up for herself, while others argued that Joy was simply doing her job. The incident divided viewers, creating an online firestorm that grew by the second. Hashtags related to Gwen's exit quickly climbed into trending lists. News outlets scrambled to gather details, contacting sources inside the studio to confirm what had happened. Some headlines exaggerated the moment, painting it as a full-blown meltdown. Others portrayed Gwen as a victim of aggressive interviewing. Each outlet took its own angle, shaping the public's understanding of the altercation. Gwen watched from afar, disheartened by the sensationalism. At home, Gwen finally changed into comfortable clothes, hoping to unwind. She sat on the couch with a cup of tea, trying to quiet her racing thoughts. The confrontation had drained her emotionally, but beneath the exhaustion, she felt a small spark of empowerment. For so long, she had remained patient and accommodating, and today marked the rare moment she chose herself over politeness. Joy eventually emerged from her dressing room, greeted by producers who carefully approached her. They discussed how to address the incident on the next episode, aware that millions of viewers would expect commentary. Joy listened intently, though her mind drifted. She wondered whether reaching out to Gwen privately would help ease tensions, or if silence would be more appropriate. Gwen's children, unaware of the full context, asked her why she looked upset when she finally joined them at home. She smiled gently, assuring them she just had a long day. Their innocent concern softened her mood, reminding her that the outside chaos didn't define her worth. Gwen hugged them tightly, grounding herself in the simplicity of family love. As the evening progressed, Gwen's phone buzzed again, this time with messages from fellow celebrities sharing their own experiences with confrontational interviews. Many expressed solidarity, telling her she handled the situation with grace. Some even encouraged her to speak out about respecting boundaries in media. The support lifted her spirits, reminding her she wasn't alone. Later that night, Joy drafted a brief message on her phone, debating whether to send it to Gwen. She typed, deleted, and rewrote variations of an apology, struggling to find the right words. Pride and regret battled within her, creating hesitation. Eventually, she set the phone down, unsure whether reaching out would mend the situation or make it worse. Entertainment talk shows and podcasts prepared segments dissecting the altercation. Analysts and hosts speculated about the deeper implications, questioning whether media personalities were becoming too invasive. In many discussions, Gwen's exit became a symbol of a growing shift toward protecting celebrity boundaries. Even Joy's approach was scrutinized in ways she hadn't anticipated. As midnight approached, Gwen sat outside on her patio, enjoying the quiet night there. She reflected on the pressure of living under a microscope and how moments like the one on The View often left lasting emotional impressions. The confrontation had been unexpected and draining, but also strangely clarifying. She realized she needed to set firmer boundaries moving forward, both publicly and personally. When Gwen finally went to bed, she knew that the next day would bring headlines, speculation, and endless opinions. But she also knew she had stood up for her own peace, and that mattered more than public perception. The world would talk, analyze, and judge her, but Gwen felt a sense of calm knowing she had stayed true to herself. As she closed her eyes, she allowed herself to exhale the final remnants of the day's tension.